Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. I'm on YouTube. I am on Odyssey, and I'm live now on Facebook. I'm going to be reading from this particular book by Edward Bernays, Propaganda, chapter 6 here, and dealing with what I would call political propaganda and political leadership. So let's get into the meat of the book. Chapter 6, Propaganda and Political Leadership. The great political problem in our modern democracy is how to induce our leaders to lead. The dogma that the voice of the people is the voice of God tends to make elected persons the willless servants of their constituents. This is undoubtedly part cause of the political sterility of which certain American critics constantly complain. No serious sociologist any longer believes that the voice of the people expresses any divine or especially wise and lofty ideas, you see. The voice of the people expresses the mind of the people, and that mind is made up for it by the group leaders in whom it believes, and by those persons who understand the manipulation of public opinion. It is composed of inherited prejudices and symbols and cliches and verbal formulas supplied to them by their leaders. Let me change something real quick here. Formerly, the sincere and gifted politician is able, by the instrument of propaganda, to mold and form the will of the people. A quote, Disraeli, cynical, expressed the dilemma when he said, I must follow the people. Am I not their leader? He might added, I must lead the people. Am I not their servant? Unfortunately, the method of our contemporary politicians in dealing with the public are as archaic and ineffective as the advertising methods of business in 1900 would be today. While politics was the first important department of American life that used propaganda on a large scale, it has been the slowest in modifying its propaganda methods to meet the changed conditions of the public mind. American business first learned from politics the methods of appealing to the broad public, but it continually improved those methods of the course, that is, a competitive struggle, while politics clung to the old formulas. The political apathy of the average voter, of which we hear so much, is undoubtedly due to the fact that the politician does not know how to meet the conditions of the public mind. He cannot dramatize himself and his planned platform in terms which had real meaning to the public. Acting on the fallacy that the leader must slavishly follow, he deprives his campaign of all dramatic interest. Automation cannot arouse the public interest. A leader, a fighter, a dictator can, but given our present political conditions under which every office seeker must cater to the vote of the masses, the only means by which the born leader can lead is the expert use of propaganda. So you see what he's talking about already, saying that the political field itself is backward. Continue. Whether the problem of getting elected to office or in the problem of interpreting and popularizing new issues, or is the problem of making the day-to-day administration of public affairs a vital part of the community life. The use of propaganda carefully adjusted to the mentality of the masses is an essential adjunct of political life. The successful businessman today apes the politician. He has adopted the glitter and the ballyhoo of the campaign. He has set up all of the sideshows. He has annual dinners that are a compendium of speeches, flags, bombast, state-mindedness, pseudo-democracy, slightly tinged with paternalism. On occasion, he doles out honors to employees, much as the Republic of classic times rewarded its worthy citizens. But these are merely the sideshows, the drums of big business by which it builds up an image of public service and of honorary service. This is but one of the methods by which business stimulates loyal enthusiasm on the part of the directors, the workers, the stockholders, and the consumer public. It is one of the methods by which big business performs its functions of making and selling products to the public. The real work and campaign of business consists of intensive study of the public, the manufacture of products based on this study, and exhaustive use of every means of reaching the public. Political campaigns today are all sideshows. all honors, all bond blasts, glitter, and speeches. These are for the most part unrelated to the main business of studying the public scientifically, supplying the public with party, candidate, platform, and performance, and selling the public these ideas and products. Politics was the first big business in America. Therefore, there is a good deal of irony in the fact that business has learned everything that politics has to teach, but that politics has failed to learn very much from business methods of mass distribution of ideas and products. Emma Ewa Blair has recounted in The Independent a typical insistence on the waste of effort and money in a political campaign, a week speaking tour in which she herself took part. She estimates that on a 5-day trip covering nearly 1,000 miles, she and the United States Senator with whom she was making political speeches addressed no more than 1,105 people, whose votes might conceivably have been changed as a result of their efforts. The cost of this appeal to these votes, she estimates, calculating the value of the time spent on the very moderate space as being $15.27 for each vote, which might have been changed as a result of the campaign. This, she says, was a drive for votes, just as the Ivory Soap advertising campaign is a drive for sales. But she asks, why would a company executive say to the sales manager who sent a high-priced speaker to describe his product to less than 1,200 people at a cost of $15.27 for each possible buyer? She finds it amazing that the very men who make their millions out of cleverly devised drives for soap and bonds and cars will turn around and give large contributions to be expenditure for vote getting in an ultimately inefficient and antiquated fashion. Let me give you an idea what she's talking about price-wise here. So she's saying, let's get in here. Hold on just a second. I'll calculate this, what she's saying. So she's saying $15.27 for each vote. That is for 1,200 people. So what is she talking about money-wise? She's talking about roughly $18,324 that was spent. So just thought I'd find out what the mark was. She finds it amazing that the very men who make their, okay, we already said that. Okay, it is indeed incomprehensible that politicians do not make use of their elaborate business models, or methods, I should say, that the industry has built up, because a politician who knows political strategy can develop campaign issues, can devise strong plans or platforms, and envision broad policies. It does not follow that he can be given the responsibility of selling ideas to a public as long or as large as the United States. The politician understands the public. He knows what the public wants and what the public will accept. But the politician is not necessarily a general sales manager or a public relations counsel or a man who knows how to secure mass distribution of ideas. Obviously, an occasional political leader may be capable of combining every feature of leadership, just as in business, there are certain brilliant industrial leaders who are financiers, factory directors, engineers, sales managers, and public relations counsel, and all rolled into one. Big business is conducted on the principle that it must prepare its policies carefully, and that in selling an idea to the large buying public of America, it must proceed according to broad plans. The political strategist must do likewise. The entire campaign should be worked out according to broad basic plans. Platforms, planks, pledges, budgets, activities, personalities must be as carefully studied, proportionate, and used as they are when big business desires to get what it wants from the public. The first step in a political campaign is to determine the objectives and to express them exceedingly well in the current form, that is, as a platform. In devising the platform, the leader should be sure that it is an honest platform. Campaign pledges and promises should not be lightly considered by the public, and they ought to carry something of the guarantee principle and money-back policies that an honorable business institution carries with it the sale of its goods. The public has lost faith in campaign promotional work. It does not say that politicians are dishonorable, but it does say that the campaign pledges are written on the sand. Here then is one fact of public opinion of which, I should say, the party that wishes to be successful might well take cognizance. To aid in the preparation of the platform, there should be made a nearly scientific analysis as possible of the public and of the needs of the public. A survey of public desires and demands would come to the aid of the political strategists whose business it is to make a proposed plan of the activities of the parties and its elected officials during the coming terms of office. A big business that wants to sell a product to the public surveys and analyzes its market before it takes a single step either to make or to sell this product. If one section of the community is absolutely sold to the idea of this product, no money is wasted in reselling it to it. If, on the other hand, another section of the public is irrevocably committed to another product, no money is wasted on a lost cause. Very often, the analysis is the cause of the basic changes and also the improvements in the product itself, as well as an index of how it is to be presented. So carefully is this analysis of markets and sales made that when a company makes out its sales budget for the year, it subdivides the circulations of the various magazines and newspapers that use in advertising and calculates with a fair degree of accuracy how many times a section of that population is subjected to the appeal of that company. It knows approximately to what extent a national campaign duplicates and reveals the emphasis of a local campaign of selling. As in the business field, the expenses of the political campaign should be budgeted. A large business today knows exactly how much money it is going to spend on propaganda during the next year or years. It knows that a certain percentage of its gross receipts will be given over to advertising. Newspaper, magazines, outdoor, and poster, a certain percentage to circulation and sales promotion, such as house organs and dealer aids, and a certain percentage must go to the supervising salesman who travel around the country to infuse extra stimulus in the local sales campaign. So it sounds like, you're advertising business such and such, and you use all the gambits here. But again, you have to understand, if I'm seeing this correctly, you've got to have a big budget for this. So this is also another thing, how big business becomes bigger, you see. It's not always guaranteed what I would call a smaller company with this. And I think that's that's something I would share with even with smaller companies. It's a different part of the deal. A political campaign should be similar to budget. The first question which should be decided is the amount of money that should be raised for the campaign. Decision can be reached by a careful analysis of campaign costs. There's another procedure, business procedure, to enable experts to work this out accurately. Then the second question of importance is the matter which money should be raised. It is obvious that politics would gain much in prestige if the money-raising campaigns were conducted candidly and publicly, like the campaigns for the war funds, you see. Charity drives might be made excellent models for political fund drives. The elimination of the little black bag element in politics would raise the entire prestige of politics in America, and the public interest would be infinitely greater if the actual participation occurred earlier and more constructively in the campaign. Again, as in the business field, there should be a clear decision as to how the money is to be spent. It should be done according to the most careful and exact budgeting, wherein every step in the campaign is given its proportionate importance and the funds allotted accordingly. Advertising in newspaper and periodicals, posters and street banners, the exploitation of personality in motion pictures, in speeches, lectures and meetings, spectacular events, and all forms of propaganda should be considered proportionate according to the budget and should always be coordinated with the whole plan. Certain expenditures may be warranted if they represent a small portion of the budget and may be totally unwarranted if they make up a large proportion of the budget. In the same way, the emotions by which the public is approached or appealed to may be part of the broad plan of the campaign. Unrelated, that is, emotions become molded and sentimental too easily, are often costly, and too often waste efforts because the idea is not part of the conscious and coherent whole. Big business has realized that it must use as many of the basic emotions as possible. The politician, however, has used the emotion aroused by words exclusively. To appeal to the emotions of public in a political campaign is sound. In fact, it is an indispensable part of the campaign, but the emotional content must, quote, A, coincide in every way with the broad basic plans of the campaign and all its minor details. B, be adaptable to many groups of the public at which it is to be aimed at. C, conform to the media of the distribution of these ideas. The emotions of our orator has been worn down through long years of Overuse, that is, parades, mass meetings, and the like, are successful when the public has a frenzy emotional interest in the event. The candidate who takes babies on his lap as he's photographed taken is doing a wise thing emotionally if this act epitomizes a definite plank in his platform. Kissing babies, is if it's worth anything, must be used as a symbol for a baby policy and must be synchronized with a plank in the platform also. But the haphazard staging of emotional events without regard to their value as part of the whole campaign is a waste of effort, just as it would be a waste of effort for the manufacturer of hockey skates to advertise a picture of a church surrounded by spring foliage. It is true that the church appeals to our religious impulses and that everybody loves the spring, but these impulses do not help to sell the idea that hockey skates are amusing, helpful, or increasing the general enjoyment of life for the buyer. Present day politics places emphasis on personality. The entire party, a platform, international policy sold to the public, or is it not sold on the basis of the intangible element of personality? A charming candidate is the alchemist secret that can transmute a prostitute platform into a gold of votes. Helpful as it is, candidate who for some reason has caught the imagination of the country, the party and its aims are certainly more important than the personality of the candidate. Not personality, but the ability of the candidate to carry out the party's program accurately. And the program itself should be emphasized in a sound campaign plan. Even Henry Ford, the most picturesque personality in business in America today, has become known through his product and not for his product through him. It's essential for the campaign managers to educate the emotions in terms of groups. The public is not made up merely of Democrats and Republicans. People today are largely uninterested in politics, and their interest in the issues of the campaign must be secured by coordinating it with their personal interests. The public is made up of interlocking groups such as economics, social, religious, educational, cultural, racial, collegiate, local, sports, and hundreds of others, you see. When President Cooley invited actors for breakfast, he did so because he realized not only the actors were a group, but that the audience, the large group of people who like amusements, who like people who amuse them, and who like people who can be amused, ought to be in line with him. The Shepherd Tower maternity bill was passed because the people who fought to secure its passage realizing that mothers made up a group, that educators made up a group, and that the physicians made up a group, that all these groups in turn influenced other groups, and that taken all together, these groups were sufficiently strong and numerous to impress Congress with the fact that people at large wanted this bill to be made part of the national law. The political campaign, having defined its broad objectives and its basic plans, having defined the group appeal which it must use, must carefully allocate to each of the media at hand the work which it can do with maximum efficiency. The media through which a political campaign may be brought home to the public are numerous and fairly well defined. Events and activities must be created in order to put ideas into circulation. And these channels, which are as varied as the means of human communications, every object which presents pictures or words that the public can see, everything that presents intelligible sounds can be utilized in one way or another. At present, the political campaigner uses for the great part the radio, the press, the banquet hall, the mass meetings, the lecture platform, and the stump generally as a means for furthering his ideas. But this is only a small part of what he may be done. Actually, there are infinite more varied events that can be created to dramatize the campaign and to make people talk of it, such as exhibits, contests, Institute of Politics, the cooperation of educational institutions, the dramatic cooperation of groups which hitherto have not been drawn into active politics, and many others may be made the vehicle for presentation of ideas to the public, you see. But whatever is done must be synchronized accurately with all other forms of appeal to the public. News reaches the public through the printed word, through books, magazines, letters, posters, circulars, and banners, newspapers through pictures, photographs, and motion pictures, through the ear, lectures, speeches, band music, radio, campaign saying. All these must be employed by the political party if it to succeed. One method of appeal is merely one method of appeal. In this age wherein 1,000 movements and ideas are competing for public attention, One dare not put all one's egg into one basket. It is to be understood that the methods of propaganda can be effective only with a voter who makes up his own mind on the basis of his group prejudices and desires, where specific allegations and loyalties exist, as in the case of boss leadership. These loyalties will operate to mollify the free will of the voter. In this close relation between the boss and his constituents lie, of course, the strength of his position in politics. It's not necessary for the politician to be the slave of the public group prejudices if he can learn how to mold the mind of the voters in conformity with his own ideas of public welfare and public service. The important thing for the statesman of our age is not so much to know how to please the public, but to know how to sway the public. In theory, the education might be done by means of learned pamphlets, that is, explaining the intricacies of public questions. In actual fact, it can be done only by meeting the conditions of the public mind, by creating circumstances which set up trains of thoughts, by dramatizing personalities, by establishing contact with group leaders who control the opinions of the opinions of the public. But campaigning is only an incident in political life. The process of government is continuous, and the expert use of propaganda is more useful and fundamental, although less striking, as an aid to democratic administration than as an aid to vote getting. Good government can be sold to a community just as any other commodity can be sold. Interesting word, isn't it? Government can be sold to the community just as any other commodity can be sold. Yeah, I don't like that statement, folks. That's probably the reason why I don't vote. More than that. I often wonder whether the politicians of the future who are responsible for maintaining the prestige and effectiveness of their party will not endeavor to train politicians who are at the same time propagandists. I talked recently with George Olvany, Olvany. He said a certain number of Princeton men were joining Tammany Hall. If I were in his place, I should have taken some of my brightest young men and set them to work for Broadway's theatrical product productions, or apprenticed them as assistants to professional propagandists before recruiting them to the service of the party. One reason, perhaps, why the politician today is slow to take up methods which are commonplace in business life is that he has such ready entry to the merits of communication on which his power depends. The newspaper looks to him for news, and by his power of giving or withholding information, the politician can often effectively censor political news. But being dependent every day of the year and for year and after year upon certain politicians for news, newspaper reporters are obliged to work in harmony with their news sources. The political leader must be a creator of circumstances, not only a creator of the mechanical process of stereotyping and rubber stamping. Let us suppose that he is campaigning on a low tariff platform. He may use the modern mechanism of the radio to spread his views, but he will almost certainly use the old psychological method approach, which was old in Andrew Jackson's day, which business has largely discarded. He will say over the radio, vote for me and low tariff, because the high tariff increases the cost of things you buy. He may, if it's true, have the great advantage of being able to speak by radio directly to 50 million listeners, but he's making an old-fashioned approach. He's arguing with them. He's assaulting single-handedly the resistance of inertia, you say. If he were a propagandist, on the other hand, although he would still use the radio, he would use it as one instrument of a well-planned strategy. Since he is campaigning on the issue of low tariff, he not merely would tell people that the high tariff increases the cost of living they buy, but would create circumstances which would make his contention dramatically and self-evident. He would perhaps stage a low tariff exhibition simultaneously in 20 cities, with exhibits illustrating the additional costs due to the tariff in force. He would see that these exhibitions were ceremoniously inaugurated by prominent men and women who were interested in low tariff, apart from any interest in his personal political fortunes. He would have groups whose interests were especially affected by high costs of living, institute agitation for lower schedules. He would dramatize the issue, perhaps by having prominent men boycott woolen, W-O-O-L-E-N's clothes and go to the important functions in cotton suits until the wool schedule was reduced. He might get the opinion of social workers as to whether the high cost of wool endangers the health of the poor in winter. In whatever ways he dramatizes the issue, the attention of the public would be attracted to the question before he addressed them personally. Then, when he spoke to his millions of listeners on the radio, he would not be seeking to force an argument down the throats of public thinking or other things and annoyed by another demand on his attention. On the contrary, he would be answering the spontaneous questions, expressing the emotional demands of a public already keyed to a certain pitch of interest in the subject. The importance of taking the entire world public into consideration before planning an important event is shown by the wise actions of Thomas Masaryk, spelled out Masaryk, then provisional president, now the president of the Republic of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia officially became a free state on Monday, October 28, 1918, instead of Sunday, October 17, 1918, because Professor Martin realized the people of the world would really receive more information and would be more receptive to announcing the Republic's freedom on a Monday morning than on a Sunday, because the press would have more space to devote to it on Monday morning. Discussing the matter with me before he made the announcement, Professor Masaryk said I would be making history for the cables if I changed the date of Czechoslovakia birth as a free nation. Cables make history, and so the date was changed. This incident illustrates the importance of technique in the new propaganda. It will be objective, of course, that propaganda will tend to defeat itself as its mechanism becomes obvious to the public. My opinion is that it will not. The only propaganda which will ever tend to weaken itself as the world becomes more sophisticated and intelligent is propaganda that is untrue or unsocial. Again, the objection is raised that propaganda is utilized to manufacture our leading political personalities. It is asked whether, in fact, the leader makes propaganda or whether propaganda makes the leader. There's a widespread impression that a good press agent can puff up a nobody into a great man. The answer is the same as that made to that old query as to whether the newspaper makes public opinion or whether public opinion makes the newspaper. There has to be a fertile ground for the leader and the idea to fall on. But the leader also has to have some vital seed to sow. To use another figure, a mutual need has to exist before it either can become positively effective. Propaganda is of no use to the politician unless he has something to say which the public consciously or unconsciously wants to hear. But even supposes that a certain propaganda is untrue or dishonest, we cannot on that account reject the method of propaganda as such. For propaganda in some form will always be used where leaders need to appeal to their constituents. The criticism is often made that propaganda tends to make the president of the United States so important that it becomes not the president, but the embodiment of the idea of hero worship, not to say deity worship. I quite agree that this is so, but how are you going to stop a condition which accurately reflects the desires of a certain part of the public? The American people rightly sense the enormous importance of the executive office. If the public tends to make of the president a heroic symbol of that power, that is not the fault of propaganda, but lies in the very nature of the office and its relation to the people. This condition, despite its somewhat irrational puffing up of a man to fit the office, is perhaps still more sound than its condition in which the man utilizes no propaganda or a propaganda not adapted to its proper end. Note the example of the Prince of Wales. This young man reaped bales of clippings and little additional glory from his American visit, merely because he was poorly advised. To the American public, he became a well-dressed, charming, sports-loving, dancing, perhaps frivolous youth. Nothing was done to add dignity and prestige to this impression until towards the end of his stay, he made a trip to the subway of New York. The sole venture into its democracy and the serious business of living as evident in the daily habits of workers aroused new interest in the prince. Had he been properly advised, he would have argumented this somewhat by such serious studies of American life as were made by the another prince, that is Gustav of Sweden. As a result of this lack of well-directed propaganda, the Prince of Wales became, in the eyes of the American people, not the thing which he constitutionally is, a symbol of unity of the British Empire, but part of the parcel of the sporting Long Island and dancing beauties of the ballroom. Great Britain lost the invaluable opportunity to increase the goodwill and understanding between the two countries when it failed to understand the importance of correct public relations counsel for its royal Highness. The public action of American chief executives are, if one chooses to put it this way, stage man, but they are chosen to represent and dramatize the man in his function as representative of the people, a political practice which at its roots in the tendency of the popular leader to follow oftener than he leads is the technique of the trial balloon, which he uses in order to maintain, as he believes, his contact with the public. The politician, of course, has his ear to the ground. He might be called a clinical ear. It touches the ground and hears the disturbance of the political universe. But he often does not know what the disturbance means, whether they are superficial or fundamental. So he sends up his balloon. He may send out an anonymous interview through the press. He then waits for reverberations to come from the public, a public which expresses itself in mass meetings or resolutions or telegrams or even such obvious manifestations as editorials in the partisan or nonpartisan press. On the basis of these repercussions, he then publicly adopts his original tentative policy or rejects it or modifies it to conform to the sum of public opinion which has reached him. This method is modeled on the peace feeders, which were used during the war to sound out the disposition of the enemy to make peace or to test any one of the dozen other popular tendencies. It is the method commonly used by a politician before committing himself to legislation of any kind, and by a government before committing itself on foreign or domestic policies. It's a method which has little justification. If a politician is a real leader, he will be able, by the skillful use of propaganda, to lead the people instead of following people by means of a clumsy instrument of trial and error. The propagandist's approach is the exact opposite of that of the politician just described. The whole basis of successful propaganda is to have objective and then endeavor to arrive at it through an exact knowledge of the public and modify circumstances to manipulate and sway that public. You see, the function of a statesman, said George Bernard Shaw, is to express the will of the people in a way of a scientist. The political leader of today should be a leader as finely versed in technique of propaganda as in political economy and civics. If he remains merely the reflection of the average intelligence of his community, he might as well go out of politics. If one is dealing with a democracy in which the herd and the group follow those whom they recognize as leaders, they should not why should not a young man training for leadership be trained in technique as well as in the idealism? When the interval between the intelligent classes and the practical classes is too great, says the historian Buckle, B-U-C-K-L-E, the former will possess no influence, the latter will reap no benefits. Propaganda bridges this interval in our modern complex civilization. Only through the wise use of propaganda will our government, considered as a conditional administrative organ of the people, be able to maintain that intimate relationship with the public which is necessary in a democracy. As David Lawrence pointed out in a recent speech, there is need for an intelligent interpretive bureau for our government in Washington. There is, it is true, a division of current information in the Department of State, which at first was headed by a trained newspaperman, but later this position began to be filled by men from the diplomatic service, men who had very little knowledge of the public, while some of these diplomats had done very well. Mr. Lawrence asserted that in the long run the country would be benefited if the function of this office were in the hands of a different type of person. There should, I believe, be an Assistant Secretary of State who is familiar with the problem of dispensing information to the press, someone upon whom the Secretary of State can call for consultations and who has sufficient authority to persuade the Secretary of State to make public that which for insufficient reason is suppressed. The function of propagandists is much broader in scope than that of a mere dispenser of information to the press. The United States government should create a Secretary of Public Relations as member of the President's Cabinet. The function of this official should be correctly to interpret America's aims and ideals through the world, and to keep the citizens of this country in touch with government activities and the reasons which prompt them. He would, in short, interpret the people to the government and the government to the people. Such an official would be neither a propagandist nor a press agent. In the ordinary understanding of these terms, he would be rather a trained technician who would be helpful in analyzing public thought and public trends in order to keep the government informed about the public and the people informed about the government. American relations with South America and with Europe would be greatly improved under such circumstances. Ours must be a leadership democracy administered by the intelligent minority who know how to regiment and guide the masses. In this government by propaganda, call it, if you prefer, government by education. But education in the academia sense of the word is not sufficient. It must be enlightened and expert through the creation of circumstances, through the high spotting of significant events and the dramatization of important issues. The statesman of the future will thus be enabled to focus the public mind on crucial points of policy and regiment a vast heterogeneous mass of voters to clear understanding and intelligent action. And that is the end of chapter 6 with Edward Bernays with a book called Propaganda. And I didn't know he would go into this particular area of politics. It's interesting what he says, although I disagree with him. The other thing I really struggle with in this whole thing is that I don't agree with the issue of democracies, and I never have. This country was not set up as a democracy. It was set up as a republic. And I think people have forgotten that. And the word has been used so much that people believe that we are a democracy. And in reality, what that means is very simple, folks. It means the majority have power and the minority has very little power. And I understand what they're doing, but you're supposed to always give power to those who are less fortunate. And what I mean by that, let me explain, is that usually the working man is the last man that ever gets a chance to speak his mind, because he's always working. You see, he's trying to make a living. And in reality, most of democracy is a form of propaganda. That's what he's talking about. This is what's happened to all this. I disagree with what he's doing here about this whole chapter 6, because what's happening simply is he's molding a policy in order to get that majority vote. And that doesn't mean he's right or wrong, but in reality, simply it's usually the majority is wrong. In fact, 9 out of 10 times the majority is always wrong, because they don't follow what's going on usually. They just follow what everybody else is saying. And whoever makes the loudest noise is what usually happens. Our herd tends to follow that way. So anyway, appreciate you being here, and thank you for listening. And we'll let you go. And thank you again. You have a good evening, okay? Thank you.